David Bruce Leonard. I'm going to tell you a little story. I was first introduced to him through a lover who gave me his book, How to Worship the Goddess and Keep Your Balls, and said, "You need to read this." And we were having some communication difficulties, as you might imagine. And I read this book, and it was the first relationship book that I'd ever read that I felt was actually written specifically toward men and in such a way that didn't demonize women or make men feel stupid and small. So after I read that, I said to myself, I need to meet this guy. And 2 years later, I found myself in Maui, where I knew that he lived, or at least he did business there. And I figured out how to get a hold of him, and we had a lunch. And then from there, it's just been on. And I feel like, he's been a fellow traveler in the somatic field. What he's been able to do is bring these separate modalities and ideas together in a really cohesive way. So he's a licensed acupuncturist, a student and teacher of Hawaiian herbal medicine. He's a martial artist with training in Krav Maga, among other things. And he's also a self-defense instructor. He's traveled around the world documenting traditional plant wisdom, and you can find his documentaries in the show notes. And he's an author of many books, not only about sacred sexuality, but wild plant medicine and nature connection, somatics in nature. And he's working on one right now about women's safety in a dangerous world. The thing about David is how he has been able to integrate all these modalities. And, by his own confession, he's known for trying to put apples and bicycles together, but he's done a great job at it. And the thing about David is that he really lives what he teaches. And in a world that is quick to commodify wisdom, that's rare. So I hope you'll drop in, take a nice deep breath, and put on your thinking hat and be ready for this wonderful journey into the life of David Bruce Leonard. Thank you. David, how you
Hey,
doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, it's good to see you
Keeps,
coming in all the way from Hawaii.
yeah,
You're on the Big Island, right?
yes. Yeah, I'm in Hamakua.
In where?
Hamakua means it's north of Hilo. Hamakua means the breath of the parents. That's the trade winds that come in. So it's kind of,
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, that's
yeah,
fantastic. And
yeah.
so I'm going to ask you to just give a little summary of what has brought you to this part of your life with your healing work, with the acupuncture, with the sacred sexuality, with the plant um, identification and work with the plants. I know you've written a book or a couple of books around that.
Um, yeah, I think it's cross-referencing memes, cross-referencing intellectual traditions. So I some people say I mix apples and bicycles. You know, so I like to look at a system of thinking, or a meme or a reality, and then see how it fits with how it connects to other realities.
Hmm.
So yeah,
So would you
so
call
there's
that
this.
integrating different
Yeah,
disciplines,
it's kind of
modalities?
like system thinking in spiral dynamics. When you're in green, above green, I can't remember if it's yellow or something, but you're looking at systems, and rather than them being dogmas about the way things are, because theories are just ideas that we lay on the world. The world exists beyond our theories about it.
I
And
I
we get addicted to our memes, and then we'll fight and kill for these things that don't exist. Money, religion, these things that don't have a material substance. Yeah,
Would you call that belief systems? Is that, would you
yeah,
say
belief
that?
system, paradigms. So
Mhm.
they're memes, they're ideas. Christianity, feminism, communism, money, language. They're all mathematics. They're all memes. None of them exist in the world. They're just things that exist in our nervous system that we get addicted to, and then we try and find people that match up with us and our tribe, and then we reject people that have different memes, different stories and belief systems. The I've tried to get to a point where I'm a tiny bit less addicted to my memes. So that's what I'm working on. So I compare. Like hardcore science to traditional Chinese medicine, and I focus a lot on traditions that are time tested, and
Mhm.
to see how science would inform me, so I could hold those two in this, that cognitive dissonance in the same space. So,
So would you say that with the more traditional stuff, which it sometimes can become a more concretized belief system, or whether it's true or not, um, when you bring the science in, you feel like you can actually prove some of what the
well,
traditions are
I
saying.
have
Is that what I'm
people,
hearing?
yeah, like most people in the West, I have a bias. I think that science kind of proves stuff,
Okay.
which actually is not true. I mean, it's very limited. Science looks at everything through a tiny hole. Um, but I think it's a really useful model and it's very practical.
Mhm.
But yeah, but my bias is to if science says it's real, it's real. When
Right.
we both know that's not true. Science is just another meme, another gloss we're laying on top of
Mhm.
whatever reality is. But yeah, so I will like when I learn traditional nature skills practices or nature connection practices, I try and correlate those with human physiology because our ancestors were not stupid. They were geniuses, brilliant,
Oh,
brilliant.
yeah.
And so when things have stood the test of time under intense scrutiny and observation, regardless of whether you're using the scientific method, I tend to trust that. And
Trust which one? The
I tend to trust the traditions,
Okay.
you know. So, well, I teach three different things. I teach science, I teach traditional practices, and if something is common sense, I will also go with that.
Hmm.
So any one of those I will teach. If I get two or three of them together, it's just awesome. So that's the apples and bicycles, trying to get traditional practices in from a Western perspective.
Gotcha. Okay. Traditional learning the traditional practices or understanding them from with the Western biased mind,
Both,
basically trying to bridge that gap for
right? And
people.
with sexuality and with self-defense and neuroscience and plant science and all those things. So yeah.
So talk a little bit about your plant, your work with plants and the traditional.
Well, lately, I mean, I've been working with plants since I was in my 27 or 28. With my former wife was an herbalist.
So a long time, huh, David?
Yeah, and then I went to acupuncture. I mean, I've always been, even as a kid, I was always in the woods,
Mhm.
exploring stuff. I was kind of a lonely kid, so I spent a lot of time alone in the woods.
Mhm.
And but I started actually studying formally when I was about 27. I met my ex-wife, and she's an herbalist. And then I went to acupuncture school and studied Chinese herbs. Then I
Mhm.
moved to Hawaii and studied Hawaiian medicine, which is a lot of herbs. And now I mostly travel and make videos of herbalists. Um, and there's kind of two, and I also practice. So I have a clinical practice where I treat patients. And in the practice, I do acupuncture, I do body work, and I do herbal medicine,
Okay.
and psychotherapy without a license. So, uh, and so I when I because I specialize in the plants of the tropics, when I go to tropical places, I learn. I'm familiar with a lot of the plants, so I'll make videos of traditional practitioners. So,
Yeah,
but
I've
there's
seen a couple of those that you've done. You have those up on a particular site, right? They're
yeah,
not just up on
yeah,
YouTube.
YouTube channel. But yeah, so and there's kind of two with my regular students. There's two ways to approach. There's sort of a head oriented way where you're memorizing information,
Right.
learning science,
By
learning,
rote. Yeah.
you know. And then there's a whole other realm which is intuitive, which is somatic, which is learning to experience the natural world directly with our body.
Yes. Yes.
And
And I
and
want to
late,
get more into that. So please, that.
yeah, and lately I've been exploring a lot more on psychedelic journeys, connecting with plants as equal beings.
Hmm.
It's been very interesting, very profound. My Hawaiian teachers would listen to plants, and they taught me, and I learned how to do that. And I did, it was interesting, and I like to break frame. To we have, we have cognitive biases, and we have uh, sensory gating, where we block out ideas and we block out information.
Hmm.
And when we break frame, we suspend that and we allow more information to come in.
So you're
So,
saying that with the psychedelics
well,
that
no,
allows you to break
even
frame or
yeah, well, psychedelics definitely break frame, but also even just um, saying, okay, what can I learn from a plant without science, without logic? What can I learn? So that started me on my journey of listening to plants. Uncle Bill Kanekoa was really, really good at listening to plants, and I watched my Hawaiian teachers, and then, but then about 8 years ago, I did ayahuasca, and I had a really profound experience. It was nothing like what I'd heard from plants before. It was fully engaged and very unsettling in a good way. Very, very powerful experience of seeing this plant as an equal being that was equally conscious to me. And then, so I was very curious about that because, we'll have a dream, and when we wake up, we think, oh, that was just a dream.
hmm.
But when we take psychedelics, we'll have an experience that is totally out of our normal realm. And when it comes back, it feels more real than real
Yes.
life. So it's different than a dream. It's not just a hallucination.
Right.
It feels like there's substance there. So recently, I've been exploring with a friend of mine who's an ayahuasquero. I've been exploring how do we create experiences, ceremonial experiences, where the focus is not going inside as much as going
Hmm.
outside. It's not
Wow.
interoceptive, exteroceptive, or sometimes proprioceptive, but it's mostly exteroceptive. And how do I put my attention on what's outside of me and have a semi-permeable membrane to my identity, to my being? So
Well, that sounds that is definitely breaking frame in a couple of different ways from what I
yeah,
can see, because when you go into ceremony and none of these medicines, these plant medicines, whether it's psilocybin or ayahuasca or anything like that, are meant to be done frivolously. We both know that these are,
Right.
deep teachers. And what I have always been taught is that you go inside. You go inside and keep going in and keep going in, right? So this is really I like what you're saying personally, because that's the kind of person I am. Is I like to touch. I'm kinesthetic. I want to feel it on a more conscious, subconscious level, in my body. So
Right. We're
breaking
not doing
that.
it to people. We're just alpha testing the
Oh,
like
I
we're getting
understand. I
proof of
understand.
concept. Yeah.
Right. No, I
Yeah.
understand, but it's outside the box of that stuff that is generally outside the box.
Right.
So you're pushing some
Yeah.
edges.
This is way out of the box. Listening to plants, way out of the box.
Well, and I
Um,
want to ask you about that too, because you said you watched your traditional teachers, the Hawaiians, and I imagine other folks too, and then your own experience. How do you describe, or how does that work? When you are not on a psychedelic of some sort, but you're listening to the plants. What is the process to do that?
well, so I had to kind of backwards engineer this from my Hawaiian teachers. Basically, you use your body as an antenna, and you sit with a plant that is alive, is living, and it's not injured or sick. And you sit with it, and you can touch it or whatever. And you turn off your phone. You don't write anything down. You drop into your body, and you
Mm,
just listen, and you don't edit. You don't edit what's coming through. So, because there's a lot of roof brain chatter, right?
sure.
So there's the what do they call it, the default mode network is
Right.
running, so you have to, so you may be thinking about politics or your taxes or your partner or whatever, your clothing or money, and so I let it all in, but then sometimes I will get a sensation in my body that's very specific, that appears to come from nowhere. It didn't come from my thoughts.
Hmm.
There was no thought lead into that sensation. So, but I don't edit anything and I allow everything in, and then I just notice what I'm feeling in my body sitting with that plant. And then, it takes me at least a half an hour just to shut my brain off. So the sitting is longer, and it's also when I'm sitting with a plant, I'm experiencing it as an individual. We're in a community
Mm,
where that
hmm.
that plant is a member of the community that I'm in at the moment,
Yes.
and so drop into my body, and then I just notice and I just stay with it, and I don't put it in my mouth unless I know what it is. Um, but I wait until later to taste it or to smell it. So I just see what's alive, and then and then after an hour or two or however long, I'll feel like, okay, I'm done. I'll get up, and then I'll write everything down, everything, even the goofy stuff, even the stuff that I is totally roof brain chatter. I write down.
Yeah, just kind of stream of consciousness type of,
Yeah,
right?
and
Yeah,
what and the conclusion
automatic.
that I got. So that was my sort of interpretation or hallucination of how my Hawaiian teachers would do that. They never sat me down and said, "This is how you listen to a plant." They just did it, and I watched them.
Right.
You know, so
Well, that's so much of our learning comes from just watching, whether we're even aware of it, right? And
well, yeah. And then that's also very traditional in this specific tradition. Like they say, "Nana kamaka holo hekapepe ao me paakavaha," means open your eyes, open your ears, and shut your mouth. So you don't ask questions; you just watch.
hmm.
And so there's a focus on, or a tendency to kind of feel in your body what's happening, because you're not up in your head quite so much.
Hmm. Would you, like, when we are looking at various kinds of modalities and traditions and and whatnot. Would you call that mindfulness or like meditation?
Well, yeah, you can't be. I mean, we can't. So we can't be. We can't have somatic awareness without being present.
Right.
I mean, there's the two kinds of mindfulness. There's state and stage, and it's like a whole other rabbit hole.
Well,
But
talk about those just briefly. Like, just let people know what when you say state
state
change, real quick.
state is lucidity. It's awareness of awareness, and that is what most people call enlightenment when we're watching the watcher
Okay.
or we're observing the observer, and there's that expands and collapses. Stage is more like the awareness that goes with shadow work. So how grown up am I? You know? So you can be in a very high state, like a lot of gurus, but still act like a child and an adolescent in a negative way. Even
Right.
though you're enlightened, you
Right.
still act like an idiot. And so state and stage are different. So
That's
stage is
great. I
more,
don't think that I've ever heard that distinction
oh, okay.
quite that way before. But
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and stage is somewhat cultural, although there's norms. There's wisdom in most cultures looks similar, but
Hmm.
but stage is also cultural norms, like being sensitive to being appropriate and sensitive, and not slinging your crap on people and or
Oh, come
making
on.
it right,
No
right.
fun if we don't do
Like
that.
stage is basically growing up, and
Right.
state is lucidity, is awareness of awareness. So.
That's fantastic. Well, so you came in, always have been in the woods and paying attention to plants, whether you were really doing that consciously as a learning process, but then you got into herbalism, and that led you into um, acupuncture, which
Hmm.
you're now a licensed acupuncturist, right?
Hmm. Yes,
And
and it's not.
then from there, that led you into deeper study of plants and herbs and traditional medicine, but more
Right.
specific to Hawaii and the tropics. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I also did body work before I went to acupuncture school, so I've always done body work on my clients, on my
Okay.
patients. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredible combination. There's a lot of healing out there that doesn't include touch, and that's just unfortunate
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
just such a big part of us. So, given all of this and what you've been doing, and just remind me, you have written a couple of books on herbal.
Yeah, I have a book called well, I had an acupuncture reader called the Acupuncture Point Book,
Okay,
which was used to be used in acupuncture colleges, now not so much. That was in the 80s I wrote that, and then
okay,
it was a reader. It wasn't really my material.
gotcha.
Um, and then I wrote a book called Medicine at Your Feet: Healing Plants of the Hawaiian Kingdom,
Hmm.
which is 49 medicinal plants
Okay,
cross-culturally referenced. They all grow in Hawaii, but 49 plants. And this section's on gathering protocols and things like that. And then I wrote a book called Wild Wisdom, which I put into print before it was done, on nature connection skills. And I'm in the process of rewriting that with a new co-author of mine, Eric.
got
And then I wrote a book called How to Worship the Goddess and Keep Your Balls: A Man's Guide to Sacred Sex.
right.
That's about male sexuality. And right now I'm working on two books. I'm rewriting A Wild Wisdom with Eric, and we're including Native American practices and
Mm.
memes in that book. And then I'm working on a book. I've been working on a book for 4 years called A Woman Worth Defending,
Mm.
Staying Safe in a Dangerous World. And it's already up to 400 pages, but it's about ways for women to stay safe.
Gotcha.
But it's not martial arts. There's no moves in it. It's all about psychology and situational awareness and things like that.
So, David, you and I have known each other for a little while now, and the reason that we met actually is because of your book, um, "How to Worship the Goddess and Keep Your Balls." Uh, had a I had a girlfriend that gave me that book. She's like, "You got to read this." So I read it. I'm like, I want to meet that guy. And it was probably like 2 years later, I finally got to Maui and got to meet you and
Yeah,
figured out how
yeah,
to connect with you. And it's been a great journey since, with all the ins and outs and the ups and downs. And there's a couple of things that I would say there's like three things I would say that really stand out. One is your sacred sexual work, which you are masterful at and have created this whole process called Rivers of Love, or it's not a process, it's a modality. It's a
yeah,
healing journey, you could
yeah.
say. And then the uh, the self defense work, mostly for women. I got to participate in that and be the
Right.
Q-tip that got
Yeah,
beat up. That was a lot of fun. That might be for
that
another
was fun.
time.
That was really a blast. Yeah,
And hopefully we get to do that some more.
yeah,
It's amazing work. And so, the self defense, and you yourself have studied a shit ton of self defense. You've been in,
right.
I can't even remember all the modalities. You've been in jujitsu. You've been in Aikido. Am I right? Have you
No, Muay
studied
Thai,
Muay Thai, and then what other
Kali,
what other ones have you
yeah,
studied?
Kali Niskrima, and some Krav Maga, and then
Hmm.
right now, well, I just got finished studying something that has no name. We call it assholes and elbows.
Okay.
Basically, for it's training for worst case scenarios. It's actually pure genius.
Right.
Um, but yeah, yeah. So
And then the other piece that I was that I the when the what's the book called? The Wild, what
wild,
did say that again?
wild wisdom.
Wild Wisdom, and it is what I saw. It is about the what we were talking about earlier, that connectedness to nature, or the somatics in nature. And I know
Yeah,
that it seems like that's what is a theme that's really exciting you right now as you go through writing these books. And we've had a little bit of conversation around that, but just would love to invite you to talk about that a little bit more, and
yeah.
how
Well,
it ties into all the stuff that you've been doing in the physical somatic realm.
yeah. The so well the sacred sexuality and the self defense are all somatic transformations, and that that happened in nature connection. So once you learn what's alive in your body,
Hmm.
then you can apply it to sexuality. You can apply it to violence. It's all the same um, set of windows and doors inside that opens and shut.
I love that, learning what's alive in your body, like really being able
Yeah, but
to
and
taste
just
that
notice,
almost.
because we bypass that. We go straight from rather than our feelings, our body sensations going into feelings, emotions.
Hmm.
We can experience those feelings, those somatic sensations, as value neutral. And
Yes.
they're value
You
neutral. Once
neutral.
they
Yeah.
don't need to necessarily put us into an emotion, we get enough distance to actually see what's going on, and we sort of hone that antenna, that machine.
So would you?
So
Oh, go ahead, please.
yeah, so um, yeah, so it's all the same thing, and doing the self defense and the sacred sexual work, I get to help facilitate people's transformation. I mean, I don't touch people in the sacred sexual work, but I'm there, I'm teaching them how to facilitate that. And in the self defense, I am touching people and they're beating the
Right.
crap out of me and stuff. And um, But that's, for me, that's all sort of the same thing. It all emerges from a body awareness and paying attention and noticing what's happening, what's alive.
Hmm. So the piece about it being value neutral and being able to become aware of that, would you say that with that awareness, you actually can begin to learn how to shift your internal state without needing to put the label of an emotion, or even more so put a story over it? Is
Well,
that
I mean, it's still a work in progress. So, um, but yeah, I think so. I think it allows us enough distance. It's like when we meditate and we watch our thoughts, they
mm,
arise and they go. When we realize that our thoughts are not us.
right?
Same thing in the body. When we drop in, there's a Tibetan practice called Shenpa, which is sort of somatic based interoception. But the same way we see our thoughts float away like clouds, we can watch our bodily sensations morph and change and
Mhm.
dissolve. And then we're less at effect of their impact.
Would you use that awareness to do some sort of practice to affect a change, like when we get uh, something outside stimulates us and our heartbeat goes up and our guts start
Oh,
churning and stuff? I mean, what would
yeah, you
you?
can. You certainly can. Although for me at this stage in my life, the point is not trying to change that.
Hmm.
The point is just being aware that it's a story. That sensation creates a story in me, and then I attach
I love
meaning to
that.
it, and then I have emotion. But if I can just watch the process of the creation of that story without trying to change it, just noticing how it will change. It does change. I don't have to do anything. It's going to go away, you know.
Hmm.
And as long as I don't feed it, the Tibetan practice is called Shenpa, and Shenpa is the thing that makes our thoughts sticky. So something will happen, it'll piss me off, or I'll think of something that pisses me off, and I think of something else that pisses me off, and pretty soon I'm down this rabbit hole of resentment, you
Or
know.
you keep chewing on the same thing that pissed you off. You
Exactly.
just go,
You
let's
know?
loop back into that one because boy, that
I mean,
stinks.
all right, 25 years ago, somebody hurt my feelings, and I'm
Right.
still awake at night thinking about it. It's so that's Shenpa. That is that stickiness of our thoughts. So if I in the practice, so the practice of Shenpa is unhooking from that. So when I feel myself getting angry, when I remember, I just pay attention. Oh, this is what that feels like. It's on my left side, and it's tense, and it's hot, or burning, or itchy, or whatever, or warm, or aggravating. It's just like
Hmm. Hmm.
the physical sensation, tension, tightness. So if I just put my awareness on that sensation, and I just stay present with that, very slowly that sensation will change.
Absolutely.
And then, so I unhook from the Shenpa. So the practice of Shenpa is actually unhooking from the story that goes with that sensation.
Right, like the thought that is like the clouds that moves through. It's just something that's happening.
Right. I mean, I realized about a year ago that 99% of my social relationships are all based on hallucinations. The stories. Oh, this person is wonderful. This person's terrible. This person is in this box. All these
Right.
friggin' stories, and that's. I mean, we need that. That's how we navigate the world. That's how we're wired. But we don't need it as much as you know. We also need to see that it's a story.
So here's a curiosity because Shenpa, did I say that right?
Shenpa, yeah.
Shenpa. So it is an Eastern tradition, and you know we here in the West have grown up under a whole completely different kind of structure, with Protestantism and puritanical and, much more rational in some ways, with the rational mind. Um, so the concept of, I'm just reading it as kind of detachment or, just letting it be and letting it go is not something that seems um, really available to a lot of us in the West. The being able to
Right.
just sit with it. you know, it's not something that's taught in our schools or in religion, Western religions or anything like. I mean, it is in some ways, but it's kind of hard to um, get directly to it sometimes. I think. Um, how would you describe or guide somebody into that kind of state or that kind of way of being that
It's
does
just
just has no
just practice,
idea?
paying attention. My friend David Way, who's a Taoist and martial arts instructor, he learned from his teachers. They call it giving the monkey a banana. We have monkey mind, and it's very common. We have monkey mind, and we're all that's all the
Absolutely.
story, right? So the obsession, that sort of spleen deficient spiral we get into when we're obsessing about something, and his teachers taught him to give the monkey a banana, and it calms the monkey down. And the banana is somatic awareness.
Hmm.
So he was in a situation in a monastery in China where he was really triggered by it. And basically that's all he did for, like, it was a terrible thing that he was aware had happened. And that's
Hmm.
all he did for like 8 months, was that, doing bagua, but just giving the monkey a banana. So sometimes, and that I'm
That's
sure
great.
prevents PTSD, you know. And
Yeah.
he talked about this in a class he taught for us called the eight shakes, or the eight somatic practices of how to relieve trauma, you know, Taoist
Well, this
practice.
is another thing that I'd like to dig into a little bit more with you. That's actually, I hadn't heard that one, the eight shakes, you called it?
Eight shakes, yeah, and it's just
Yeah.
a traditional Taoist practice for, it's a somatic practice, but it's basically for alleviating trauma. It's
There's so many pieces I want to dig into with you here,
I
but
know.
I'm gonna try to stay on track here as much as we
Okay,
can
all right.
because the eight shakes, I definitely would love to hear more about that. Like, is there like a brief thing that you can
Well, yeah, I don't even know much about it. We just did
Okay,
it in
all right, then we'll
class.
just
That's
we'll go. I get
yeah,
it. I mean, I've studied a lot of
yeah,
Taoist
shaking.
work, so
I just thought the giving the monkey banana thing was interesting.
I love it because on the other side of that is like uh, when it's not your monkey, don't feed it. Like I mean, I've used that myself. Like, not my monkey, not my circus. That's you over
Right,
there. That's not me.
right,
So, being able to separate yourself from what's yours and what's theirs is really,
exactly. Yeah,
powerful and
yeah. So,
understanding
I
the
don't know
somatic.
how to get people to how I would encourage people to get into that, um, because they think you're crazy, Like, I remember years ago I was taking out tourists. This had to be 25 years ago. I was taking tourists out, and at the time I'd been listening to plants for many years, but I never could explain it to people. I never tried
Right.
because there was no words. And I had all these tourists, and we went out to the forest, and I'm standing there, and I'm going, okay, everybody, line up behind me. Okay, now feel the forest with your belly. So I'm there, and I'm doing my practices, and I'm thinking this is really cool. They're not going to get this anywhere else. And after, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, I turned around and I looked at them, and they were all like, and I was like, oh, that didn't work for
Didn't
you?
work at all.
One guy goes, One guy goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. Everybody else went like this. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
so I'm probably not the guy to ask how to teach this stuff. Maybe
Well,
Reggie Ray or something. He's a Buddhist teacher. He teaches somatic awareness. But
I actually, my experience of you, and what I know that you know, um, I would beg to differ because you might not use the words like, "Hey, we're going to figure out how to understand ourselves somatically," and but the way you bring things in, like you know, um, give the monkey a banana. Stay with the sensation that's in your body and just stay with that. I mean, these are really deep practices. But I also hear and I've heard, you using breath work and movement, the
yeah,
shaking and the different things like this to either bring more awareness to what's happening in the body, or maybe break up a pattern so you can feel what's happening in the body. So
you know
that's
what I?
just been my
Yeah, I'm
experience.
sorry. Sorry.
That's been my experience of you. That's all.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you know what I do think is really useful is what in psychology they call differentiation
Hmm.
or individuation. Me not me. Like when the voices in my head are things that I learned rather than my genuine voice.
Oh, right. Okay.
I have experienced that, and that's sort of one of the stages of becoming a grown up. You have to individuate from your parents, and then you have to individuate from your own stories about the world. Um, I have found, and being vulnerable to other people's opinions. I've found, and I believe that the process of individuating, of discovering your own truth, is a somatic process,
Hmm.
and it can be done somatically. Wisdom can be obtained somatically, or interoception can be obtained somatically. And that's by just bringing your locus or your awareness, that where your locus is where you put your awareness, either in your body or in the world, bringing your locus down below the navel
Hmm.
or around the navel. So in Chinese medicine, they say that the subconscious exists below the diaphragm.
The gut brain, right? I mean,
The gut brain, yeah, and the Hawaiians call it na'au, which is means guts, and there's another Hawaiian word called na'auau, which is wisdom. And the second au in na'auau, the second au is a spiritual light. So when you bring a spiritual light, i.e., your attention below the diaphragm, you get wisdom.
right.
So
I mean, we use it too. We say, trust your gut. I mean, that's
yeah, so
we
I
have.
think just noticing where emotions, just navigating the world, identifying with our belly rather than our head,
Hmm.
is a really powerful way of just beginning those practices.
Hmm. Well, you remember the other day I sent a little statement. I sent it on the text, and I said, intimacy is not created through verbal conversation. It's that
Oh
place where
yeah,
you drop into the body and you lean in and you feel that trembling and you choose to stay anyway. I mean, that's paraphrased a little bit, but basically
yeah,
that's what it was
yeah.
saying. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. In that is that most communication, like 90% of communication, is nonverbal. Like we're reading each other's faces, we're bodies, we're the
Right,
pheromones, the smells, the energy between the heartbeat, and all that. Our body knows and reads what's happening around us all the time, I'm really loving the way you're talking about just like going down into the gut and being with the sensation there, and then learning how to trust and listen. There's the wisdom of that of the interoception, but the interoception doesn't exist by itself, right? I mean, there's
right,
proprioception, there's vestibular, there's all of the different, and then all the other senses. Depends on who you talk to, how many senses there are, but 8 to 22, I think, is a lot.
right,
So
right.
anyway,
Yeah,
yeah, lots of wisdom there for sure.
yeah, and yeah, that's there's lots of rabbit holes there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about intimacy that I was talking about was, I think deep rapport can be somatic, but
Hmm.
intimacy is what was it? David Data called it trusting your partner more than you trust yourself, because you know they have good intentions for you. So there's being able to sit with the discomfort with another person. You're right, is a form of intimacy, but intimacy is also self-disclosing
Sure.
and words and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah, and bringing our locus, our center of attention, from our head down into our belly, or when I do it, allows me to more cleanly be transparent without
Hmm.
shame or arrogance.
What would we be without shame and arrogance, David? Come on, you're taking away all the fun.
Yeah, right, or blame. Right? Yeah. So, yeah. So that's a part of, I sent you the thing on the relationship sanctuary
Hmm.
and that graphic. That's part of it is, when you're in your individual your personal sanctuary, you have to drop down to see what our truth is and then
Right.
understand our shadows. That's stage, where we fall short and we self-confront and we self-soothe. But then we also have to perceive our partner's shadows and watch their back and love them between the lines. They're going to say things, but that's not what they're really saying. So if we can,
Exactly.
use that somatic awareness to say, oh,
Hmm.
she's not mad about the dishes. She's upset because I spent money, or because she's jealous, or I'm, you know, not mad about the car. I'm upset because I think she's going to leave me, or whatever. The subtitles. That is a good way to read people is somatically, is through our gut awareness.
Is that I would say that I experience that as both vulnerable and deeply intimate.
Yeah,
You know,
it sure is. It's very vulnerable. Yeah.
yeah, it's something else, boy. So I there's a couple of things in here, um, kind of coming back to the theme of the deep ecology, or in working with the plants and the herbalism, and you know, would you or do you see intimacy and relationship health or relational health, right, as being affected by or affecting ecological health?
Yeah, I think that the reason, I mean, I don't know if that, I mean, I guess the somatic awareness would translate across from a lover relationship or a friendship relationship to listening to plants. I mean, I'm sure that's all the same mechanism of experience, but
Mm-hmm.
I think if we could really feel our bodies, we would never let a forest be clear cut, or we would never let ships remove 90% of the open ocean fish, the pelagic fish. I think if we could really feel our bodies, we wouldn't allow, even politically, what's happening. Um, because, my Hawaiian teachers will say, this will fool you, but this won't. Not always true, but most of the time it's true. This will fool you, but this won't. And we can talk ourselves into almost anything. So I mean, it takes a lot of patience to listen to a plant. It takes a lot of patience, and that same patience we can bring to our partner when we don't need to interrupt them. We're not waiting for them to take a breath so we can get our piece of information in. That's a very valuable skill.
Wow, David, that was oof, I could feel that in here. The if we could really drop in and feel our bodies and learn to trust that, and translate that into the patience to listen and to um, trust those around us, how much, well, I don't want to say better the world would be, but like how much destruction we might be able to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, I always think of us, or socially, as having these virtual reality goggles on. That we have these hallucinations about all these people, and we can see them, but there's also a gloss over them, and we just like bang into each other with these wearing these goggles. We don't see how people are really actually put together. And that's our repurposed hardware, our evolutionary hardware that we have that kept the
For sure.
tribe bonded. You know, there's a term for that. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but the fact that we're using repurposed hardware.
What is it people have said? We're Neanderthals,
Right,
living in a medieval culture with godlike powers.
right, exactly. Yeah, but we have this evolutionary hangover
Yeah,
where we're just, in some ways, we're just a fucking mess. You know?
well, sometimes
And
I think about that. It's like you can't really erase the evolutionary part. Like you can't just like get rid of it.
no, there's no post-human. Yeah, no, you
Maybe
can't.
throw everything up on AI or whatever. But
Yeah,
that. But what we
we
can't
never
do.
transcend our humanness, at least not while we have a body. So
Exactly. And why would we? I mean, it also brings a lot of just joy and
yeah,
excitement. But going back to what you were saying about the, just being with it and recognizing it for what it is,
yeah,
when
just
I
step
want
back.
to just go out and
Oh,
grab that thing, just recognize like, oh, that's my
right,
evolutionary man, wanting to protect his woman, or feed his family, or
right.
protect his territory, and I can go like, oh, I don't actually have to act on that in that way.
And we misunderstand. I mean, how many times in my life have I thought somebody was saying something and I was all worked up about it, and it turned out not to be true? I mean, it happens all the time.
Yes,
So I'm
yes,
living in this hallucination, but I still, no, 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 this time it's real.
yeah. This time it's real. That's great.
So, so yeah, so that sort of knee-jerk reaction is yeah, it's our evolutionary hangover. The amygdala's on overdrive, and yeah,
Right, totally. The cingulate cortex. I've been listening to a number of things.
right, right, yeah,
So
yeah.
many.
People that disgust us is the same part of the brain. I think it's the anterior cingulate that rotten meat smells like. You know?
So I want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit and come into this other part of what you do and have been doing for many years, and that's the sacred sexuality, and
Hmm.
obviously it ties deeply into the um, herbalism and plant medicine and the Chinese medicine, and all the somatic work, and that kind of neutral, it's just kind of a, what did you call it, neutral state, that it's
Oh,
not
value neutral. Yeah,
value
yeah.
neutral. So how did you come into that work, and then more specifically, how did that lead into you writing this book?
Well, I've always, ever since I hit puberty, I've been very interested in sex. I mean, but I think even more than most people. I've had a real genuine interest in that.
Right.
Um, and even when I was a teenager, one of my first lovers and I, bought this book on Tantra. This was like in the early 70s, you know, and there was only one book out by John Mumford, I think it was. And we bought this book and we would practice these tantric practices, you know.
Right.
And then I was always really into it. And then as I learned Chinese medicine and started studying with Taoist teachers, I started practicing and putting pieces in. And then as the science has evolved, I've started doing more and more, like correlating those things. And at one point, I was in the year 2000, I was living with a partner, and she was an acupuncture student. And I had already been doing deep tissue work for many, many years. And I had been doing acupuncture for many, many years. And so we would work on each other, and we started playing around in arousal. And we started applying the principles of Chinese medicine to deep tissue body work, to arousal. And her body would, when I worked on her, it would shift much faster and much more easily if she was aroused.
Mm.
So I created a ceremony. A little while later, I created a ceremony around that. And it was just observational. I noticed that when I did, you know, because I only do this on partners, right? If I do this work on a partner, the body is this plasticity that will shift, the fascia will shift. And you can release trauma, and there's all kinds of things you can do when you're doing the body work and arousal. But, you know, can't do it. I can't do it professionally, so I teach couples how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time went by, I was teaching the ceremony to people. I started understanding possible mechanisms for that. Why? Because that's an old occult tradition too, is where there's critical periods in biology when an organism is open to taking on imprints. So, you know, Conrad Lorenz and the ducks, right? Or humans, and when we learn languages before age 12 or so, we absorb languages, and after that we have to memorize them. We can't do it anymore. Those are critical periods. Well, some things recreate critical periods, and in traditional occult practices, sexuality was one of those things where during high arousal, high sexual arousal, we become open to suggestion,
Mm-hmm.
and just after. So, and I also learned that during arousal, we also become open to not only changing our memes or our paradigms, but changing our structure. And it turns out, and this is just totally speculation, but well, even the sex in critical period is, I'm just speculating. But it turns out that, I don't know about men, but women, when oxytocin is released, it has a sister hormone called relaxin.
Hmm.
And relaxin is produced um, when women are giving birth to, so their pelvis can open. The sacrum basically like liquefies. The whole thing becomes open and relaxed, and the connective tissue loosens. So my guess is that in arousal, and when you do deep tissue work on the fascia and the connective tissue, in arousal, the relaxin is also there. And there's tissue called elastin that the relaxin works on. So anyway, that's just my total guessing hallucination about why it works. My observation is that it works very powerfully,
Right.
but I don't know the mechanism. So
Well, I know I've got to be witness to some of that,
yeah,
um, and even in other modalities that I've studied where there was deep body work, and it wasn't necessarily a sexual arousal, but it was an arousal, you know, whether it was through breathing or whatnot, and the whole body
right.
would
That's
open.
actually a different kind of arousal. But I mean, you and I have both seen people
Right.
climaxing, having somatic transformation,
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
know, and that's incredible. That is, I mean, the potential for that to heal the body, to heal trauma is huge. It's
Mhm.
just, it's a conundrum because, you know, can't practice. I can't practice. I
Well,
mean, I,
and I think, that it's one of those things where having the right container and,
of
people that
course,
are committed to each
right,
other and that kind of a thing is it's
right.
really going to be
But I can teach people with a model and not touch people, and that works, you
right,
know.
exactly.
So when I'm teaching this, I work with a partner, and yeah, and then they get to practice.
So could you outline just sort of like briefly? I mean, it's super involved, I know, and but can you just kind of outline a little bit of like what happens in a Rivers of Love ceremony?
Sure. So it's a ceremony where one person gives to another,
Hmm.
and depending on the level of skill of the giver will depend on how the ceremony is structured. But basically, the most basic sort of entryway into that is there's the space is consecrated. So you clear the space, you create sacred space, ritual space. It's
Like a
done on a
prayer or something like that.
prayer or Tibetan bells or
Hmm.
smudging or um, Hawaiian salt or whatever one would want to do. And then it's a gift from one person to another. And then there's it begins with um, boundaries, fears, and desires, and where the people connect and they talk about what the boundaries are in the session, what fears they may have, and what they want to gain from it.
Hmm.
What's the intention? And it's from one person to another. So, I mean, you can do it where you're going back and forth, but when I teach it, basically, is one person is giving, one person's receiving. And then the intention of the body work is to arouse. So, like in normal massage, you don't. The intention is not to arouse, or normal body work. You don't want to
Hmm.
arouse. You want to do it without arousal. But in this, done with partners, the intention is to arouse. So the body work starts out in a very arousing way. And then as the body work, as the arousal increases, the body work gets deeper. So during the just of the arousal, it's myofascial, it's just superficial, and the body's covered in oil. It's superficial. And then as the arousal increases, the work gets deeper and works into the fascia deeper.
Hmm.
And when the men when a man gives to a woman, the ceremony is different than when a woman gives to a man.
Hmm.
When a man gives to a woman, he's circling in for a landing. And when a woman gives to a man, she's spiraling out for a takeoff.
Hmm.
That has to do with the polarity in the body and Taoist ideas of how men and women are wired differently,
Hmm.
generally. And so as the work progresses, there's more arousal, and it's a gift. So it's not about mutual pleasure. It's about a gift of pleasure and a gift of healing and a gift of tissue, deep
Hmm.
work and body work. And then as the ceremony comes to, at some point you decide, okay, so it's been deep tissue work. Sometimes there's breathing. Sometimes there's energetic visualizations. I mean, it can get very, very elaborate in terms of depending on the skill level and the awareness of the people doing it. Um, and then there's closure where you bring the arousal down and you calm the body down. And then there's again consecration
Right.
and the ceremony's over. Um, it's not easy. I mean, for as a man to think about because the men get aroused too when they're giving the
Sure.
work, but it's like, but it's not for me, it's for her. So it's like, so I have to, so, it takes a certain kind of man to be able to do the
Right.
work and not delude myself into thinking that something I'm, I'm doing for her is actually for me.
Right.
I mean, I can get pleasure, aroused pleasure from the touch, but it's basically for her, and that's what you want. So your antenna are tuned to her, what's going on with her.
Right.
And so the point is to create healing. And then on top of that sort of skeleton framework of a ceremony, there's very sophisticated psychological practices and magical practices where you're using that critical period to take on new intentions or to heal a certain part of your body or to go into trauma or whatever. But it's all done in arousal with pleasure.
Mm. Yeah, it's an amazing ceremony and an amazing practice for sure. And in that, do you teach couples or help bring in the idea that couples can help heal each other? Is that something you would
Yeah,
say?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's easy. The basics are easy to learn. Like the body work is actually very simple to
Mhm.
learn. But to have a man be able to hold space and not to manipulate in a negative way or not to hijack the process is challenging.
Mhm.
And for women to, and I'm obviously generalizing, for women to be able to just receive without
Mhm.
reciprocating. For many women, that's very difficult. And for a man to just give without getting anything in return is also can be very difficult for men. And you do me, I do you, you know, that kind of thing. When we teach the class, it goes both ways. So, in the beginning of the day, the women receive, and then at the end of the day, the men receive. Um, but yeah. So it hits on multiple levels.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite of the self-defense work because in that work, there's a lot of fear. We're re-traumatizing people. It's called flooding technique in the
Mhm.
self-defense work, where we're getting them to find their power in fear. And in the rivers of love work, it's getting you to find your power in arousal, which is, and they're often mutually exclusive. I mean, sometimes in BDSM you can play with that, but generally, the more fear you have, the less you're going to be able to make love and open.
Yeah. So what is I mean, if you have one, an example of a transformation that you witnessed in this work in the classes?
Um, oh my God. Well, normally, I mean, so much of it. I mean, so many things. People learn to do shadow work doing
Mhm.
this because this is kapu. It's taboo. It's forbidden. And when I'm with a partner and they are able to relax into their sensate focus into their somatic awareness. I mean, just the sexuality alone can be very liberating. But then also, I've seen many witnessed from the outside many people having transformations. I mean, you and I witnessed somebody relive a trauma
Mhm.
in in um, in high arousal, right?
Yeah.
That's healing. You know, I've seen people's pelvises shift radically.
Mm.
Um, the chest open up, the adductors. Many women. They say men shut down from the neck to the navel, and women shut down from the knees to the navel.
Mm.
So I've seen men crack open their heart just somatically at the end of a day of giving and receiving pleasure. And their heart just will crack open and they'll cry. People that haven't cried for years. Um, yeah, you'll get people women their pelvis, which is their negative pole in Taoist thought, is it opens and relaxes, and there's trust, and their partner has to be worthy of that trust, because if there's shadow happening, they're going to sniff it out. So
Right.
negative shadow. So that is like okay, and then yeah, chest opening, necks opening up, head no longer being forward, being back. There's and countless psycho-emotional transformations that because oftentimes in a ceremony with a partner, you'll do the ceremony, and then there's the check-in afterwards, and things have come up, and then you get a chance to hold space
Mm-hmm.
for your
Mm-hmm.
partner and allow them to do their shadow work. And I've had you know lovers who've never done any shadow work, and then afterwards they have the opportunity, and I'm holding space. I'm not judging anything. So they get to go exploring those spaces with a partner after they've been sexual, which is, I believe, a critical period, right? And that afterglow allows them to take on a new imprint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, there's the people that are doing this kind of or similar kind of relational healing work using things like MDMA,
Right?
because you
Yeah,
open up and people can really
yeah. And,
process things that
yeah,
maybe
people use
uh,
ketamine, MDMA, they use psilocybin,
yeah.
and it's really useful for that. I mean, it's very useful um, to use with other things, obviously carefully and with awareness. But yeah, because MDMA and psilocybin and ketamine, as far as I know, all open critical periods. They recreate
Right.
critical. And when you mix that with sexuality and pleasure, and the fact that it's okay to be human and make mistakes and screw things up, and it's just and deal with the past and stuff. It's very powerful work.
Beautiful. So I want to so we're just pretend like right now is a little cut. I'll
Okay,
cut this out. But are you
that's
good for
good
about another 10 or
because
15 minutes or yeah, right.
I want to trim this. Yeah,
Right, exactly. Are you good for about another 10 or 15 minutes?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to grab this drink real quick.
Okay. Yeah, I'm actually fasting, so I'm permanently hungry. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Yeah, this is my fasting juice. It's asparagus. I mean, not asparagus. It's astragalus and licorice.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just take your time there. We're not in a rush.
Now that hair looks like I don't know how my hair can be that short and still look messy.
It's fine. You're like the
It's fine.
wild
Yeah,
the wild man of Borneo.
right. Like that guy who does the cook shows on television.
Right, exactly. So what we'll do is we'll just when
Okay,
you're
you just tell me when.
let's just take a like I'll just let's just be quiet for like 3 seconds and then I'll start talking, okay? That way there's a cut. So I'd like to step into or just ask you some questions about this book, the one that drew me to you and your work initially, the How to Worship the Goddess and Keep Your Balls. I just the title was enough in some ways, but the reading it was one for me. It was one of the first kind of relationship books that I've read that I felt really spoke to men,
Hmm.
like really directly to men. Most of the other ones that I've read have been, even if they were written for men, they were very often from what I would consider a feminine perspective, or even written by women, like
Right,
telling men
right.
how to
No,
do it from women, you know.
no testicles on board, right?
You know, so this was a little more raw and a little more, um, for me, it spoke to me on that more masculine level, and
Right,
so I appreciated it. I have suggested it to other people, and I've had a variety of reactions to it. You know, um, which thought were really interesting. You know, people, because taking on a more masculine role or stance or vision, or you know, how to move through things from that perspective, is sometimes kind of seems kind of antithetical to the softening and being in your,
right,
you know, your feelings and being able to express emotion, and you know, what a lot of people say, you know, like really own your feminine side as a man. So
right,
that's what it really appreciated to me, and I didn't find it to be like misogynistic or, you know, hateful or anything like that. It was just
right.
spoken from a man's point of view is what it really felt like.
Well, it's funny because I wrote it in 2008, so I don't know what that is, 17 years ago or whatever it is.
That was a
And
while ago, yeah.
yeah, and when I read it now, when I look back on it, it seems really aggressive. Like I would probably soften it a bit. I wouldn't talk about
Right.
screwing on time. Yeah,
Well, I think maybe
but
that maybe that's the thing, is at that time it really spoke to me too, because I was probably feeling
yeah,
more of
right.
that too, you know.
So
And
yeah, so if I ever
I think a
do a
lot of
second
men feel
of
that.
that, I will probably rephrase those things.
But I think it's valuable because I think it does speak
Yeah,
to a lot of men, you know, maybe even especially younger men who are
yeah,
feeling more
and it was genuine. I mean, I don't regret it
right.
necessarily, but in hindsight, I would write it slightly differently.
Right.
Um, yeah, I after in let's see, when was it? I started it. I had just finished Medicine at Your Feet, and I'd been doing the Rivers of Love as a ceremony since 2000. So 7 years later, 8 years later, I've
Hmm.
been doing it for 7 or 8 years, and I just wanted to write about how to do this work, this healing work in arousal, and I started writing it, and I realized I couldn't write it without addressing male psychology or
Gotcha.
my experience of male psychology because it would be empty. So so I wrote I would write it. There's two sections to the book. There's the psychology, and then there's the techniques or the rivers of love work, and they're separate. It's really two separate books. But I put that material in there because just from my own, like I purposely didn't read any men's books. So I didn't read any David Data or Robert Masters, or I didn't read any of that stuff.
Robert Bly. Yeah.
Robert Bly I had read because I did MKP, but he doesn't deal with sexuality so much. Or yeah, no, I guess I had read Robert Bly and I'd read some other people, but I avoided definitely David Data and Robert Masters because I wanted to be my voice
Gotcha.
of my experience. So yeah, so that's how it came about. I just wrote it and writing and kept massaging it, and then I had an editor, and she would periodically slap me upside the head when I went off the rails, which is good, because I get a little too full of myself or too opinionated and draw it back in. So,
So, right, you know, so that actually, there's a few other questions, you know, that I have in that. You know, it's like how can men cultivate polarity with a powerful woman without using control tactics?
I was hoping you could tell me. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. Yeah,
Right.
it's a work in progress. It's just self confrontation and self soothing.
Hmm. So talk
Those
about self-soothing a little bit.
If you can self-confront and you can self-soothe, well, self-soothing is, is stepping outside your evolutionary hangover.
Okay. Okay.
It's like
That's beautifully
it's
put. I
not
like that. Yeah.
not believing everything you think. Her it's not her job to make you fucking happy. It's her job to make her happy.
Right.
And if that works, that's great. But we forget that, and we all revert to children, or most of us revert to being children when we're in relationships. It's and it requires to be at in order to do that, to do the yoga of relationship, we have to be able to self-soothe because we get triggered. Everybody I know gets triggered. I'm going to use the editorial we. We get triggered in because we're vulnerable, and all our scripts and our stories from childhood come up, and what we observed our parents or caregivers doing, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And without self-soothing, we just make a mess. Without self-soothing, we're just going to create a train wreck. Because when I'm in an argument with my partner and they say something hurtful, I want to hurt them back. I want to say something hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when I do, it feels good. But that's a very short-term gain and a long-term loss.
Yes, absolutely.
And if I'm in a relationship, I want to be in it for the long term. If I'm in a committed relationship, I want it to last. I mean, with that
Mm-hmm.
person for a reason. So if I can't control my mouth, I'm going to make a mess. I'm going to say things that once they're out, you can't take them back. And that is, and the ability to navigate that is self-soothing.
Okay.
Self-soothing is also allows us, it's getting a handle on our amygdala, and it allows us to self-confront too.
Mm-hmm.
That's why MDMA works and ketamine, because they shut down the amygdala so we can see our patterns, but we don't react to them. You know.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
And being triggered is, I mean, it's a gift. It's a doorway showing us, you know, showing us who we are and where we need to put our attention to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have to just self-confront and change our behavior and eat crow. And sometimes we just need to leave the person we're with because they're not safe.
Right.
And so I need to, and that's stage. That's being with a grown-up. And sometimes people are both at a very high stage, but they're just not compatible.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So just because I'm angry doesn't mean somebody did something wrong. Just because I'm pissed off about something somebody does doesn't
Yeah.
mean she did anything wrong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And if I can't self-soothe, that's going to fester. You know, we have at some point in life we have to put on our big boy pants and just grow up.
I love that. I've said, that people talking about the inner child, and I'm not knocking inner child work, but it's like there was a point when I had to tell my inner child to, yeah, grow the fuck up and go get a job. It's like, it's time, brother.
Yeah,
Daddy doesn't have any more for you right now. So,
that's right. No more pacifier. Yeah.
so um, just kind of coming back a little bit more to the book. I know that you talk a little bit about this in the book, but I don't remember it being a big part of it. But again, it's been a while since I've read it. Um, but there was one place in there where you said integration, not castration. So I'm wondering what that is. That sort of along the lines of the self-soothing, or is it?
Oh no,
Are
I don't
we?
answer that.
Oh, okay.
I need to talk to that
We,
guy. I want
we
to.
both need to reread your book. It
That was a
sounds.
long time ago, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I
Well,
don't know.
what could you imagine that would mean? You know,
Um,
just given where you are now.
yeah, it must be self-castration. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, just it's you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a rescuer superhero. You can just be a guy, and that's okay. One of we've both been in a lot of men's groups. I've been in hundreds of men's groups. Every single men's group I've been in, everybody, you scratch the surface, there's the same guy underneath, you know, possibly with the exception of a few psychopaths, but generally it's all the same guy,
And
you
talk about
know.
that guy. Who is that guy?
That guy is like, he's vulnerable, he's sensitive. He's not a dog. Men aren't dogs. He's a vulnerable, sensitive human being who's doing his best and using the best strategies he knows to find balance in himself and in his world and to feel safe and loved, you know? And sometimes he does it really fucking badly and makes a terrible mess.
Hmm.
And sometimes he does it beautifully, but it's all the same guy. All those people that we have malicious envy towards.
Hmm.
We wish we were like, so we fucking hate them. That asshole, how dare he be better than me, right? That, it's
Malicious
like,
envy. Yes. Hmm.
yeah, it's like, wow, maybe I can rise to the occasion, you know? But that guy has the same insecurities that I have. Maybe in different flavor and a different size, but it's the same insecurities.
Yeah, we're all human together, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. So,
so how would a man stay present without collapsing into guilt or dominance? I mean, we
by
kind of
well, by
talked. I think we kind of talked a
but,
little bit about that, but
yeah, by dropping into his belly and finding out what's his voice and what are voices that were planted in him by his history. And the relation. I sent you that relationship sanctuary chart. You can post
Mhm.
that if you want. That's about there's there's the personal sanctuary, which is self-soothing, and my job in my personal sanctuary is to self-confront, self-soothe, optimize my quality of life, and be a good human being. You know, and then two people, that's their job. That is their job. That's my mission in relationship. And then on top of that, above that, you have a relationship sanctuary, which is my job in the relationship sanctuary is to improve my partner's quality of life, to love between the lines, to see the subtitles, to watch her back, to make sure, that I'm not, that I'm watching her back and to optimize her quality of life without betraying my personal sanctuary.
Mhm.
And underneath all that is radical ownership, which is it is my job to optimize it. My quality of life is up to me. There's nobody else responsible for my quality of life but me.
Mhm.
And so radical ownership means I claim my quality of life as my project and
Beautiful.
hopefully doing it with integrity.
So, we're bring this to a close here, but you know, one of the questions that comes up is, what do you think men are most hungry for right now?
That's a really good question. I think Western men,
Hmm.
because I spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia, and those men are different. But Western men, American men, European men, as a rule, I think they want, well, we love sex and we love being admired. And um, that admiration is a food group. And if most men I know crave being admired, they say women need to be desired, men need to be admired. And if our partners can admire us without blowing sunshine up our ass, can, in a genuine way, can honor us for what, most men want to provide and protect, you know. And if our partners, I see men craving that. They crave genuine feedback. Nobody wants to have somebody bullshit them or flatter them, but genuine feedback about appreciation about what I'm providing and how I'm protecting, and without and still have the negative stuff come up, and I need to self-confront around. But I think most men really crave that.
That's a pretty tough road in a world where the providing part is not near as important as it was.
Yeah, yeah, and you see that in Asia where it's more important. But there's so many ways men can provide. Even if
Uh,
he's taking care of the kids and cleaning the house and doing laundry or just picking up his socks, I mean, or being a good lover or, any of those things.
so
That
it's not
is,
just a financial providing or
no, no, oh,
going
we
out and
provide, God, we
hunting the
can
beast.
provide a shoulder to cry on. We can provide a warm embrace or a clean, bed sheet or. Yeah, it's not just money.
So the basic difference, even at that, it still comes down to um, admired and what was the feminine?
Oh, and women want to be desired.
Desired and admired. Desired and
Yeah.
admired. I mean, if you strip away all the social conditioning, those two things are still existent at the
Yeah, generally. I mean,
generally, right?
men want to be, I want to be desired, and then women want to be admired too. But generally, it's sort of a Taoist truism that that's the case, and it has to do with our positive and negative poles in our body and all this esoteric stuff. But yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and also it's an evolutionary hangover. I mean, it's genetic, and you know.
Mm. Well, David, um, before we leave, I'd like to ask you just one more question. What are you passionate about right now?
I am. I just started working in a rehab center,
Hmm.
people in rehab, as a coach counselor, not a licensed counselor, but as a coach. And I'm passionate about re-examining my coaching work. I was a coach for a few years when I stopped doing Chinese medicine, and it was actually 30 years ago
Hmm.
that I used to design coaching systems, and now I have these coaching systems which I have pretty much rejected for myself because they were a little too ambitious and a little too many ways to fail. But now that I'm coaching people and I'm seeing them change in the rehab center, I'm really excited about reviving those coaching systems and making them more humane,
Hmm.
less ambitious, and more sensitive to our humanity. So,
Hmm. Well, thank you, David. It's been
yeah,
great to sit
thanks,
here
Jay.
and talk with you again and see your
Yeah,
face. Hopefully, we'll get to connect in person again sometime in the not too distant future.